In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up mixes in your Frsky radio to get the best possible performance on your plane for knife edge, as well as slow rolls or other precision maneuvers that involve rolling and using the rudder. So let's talk about why you need this type of mixes in the first place. A perfect knife edge would mean you apply rudder and the airplane just goes straight with the wings perpendicular to the ground. The issue is that pretty much any plane, even the very best high-performance aerobatic planes, they will actually roll a little bit and pitch up or down a little bit when you are applying rudder. In my experience, they usually try to roll so that they go back upright, and they usually pitch down a little bit. So you always have to compensate with some aileron and some elevator. If you're doing a simple knife edge pass, that's not that hard to compensate for, but when you are doing more complex things like slow rolls, rolling circles, anytime you apply rudder, you are still getting that same behavior, and in those situations it would be much harder to compensate for that with complete precision. That's where these mixes come into place and are really useful and are really commonly used in IMAC or pattern. So this is going to be two mixes. It's going to be a rudder to aileron mix and a rudder to elevator mix. Let's take a look at how we do that in the transmitter. Okay, let's start programming those mixes. So we are going to start with the rudder to aileron mix. So we can come here to the predefined mixes, rudder to aileron. I'm going to put this on my last position. So now let's see what happens just by default. So we can see that when we move the aileron, when we move the rudder, the ailerons are moving, but one of them is moving the opposite direction of what we would want. So we can go here. In this case, we were saying that when we are applying right rudder, the plane tends to do this. So we would want left ailerons applied. I apply right rudder. That one is correct. This one should be going up. So I'm going to change my weight of aileron 1 to a negative. So now when I go right rudder, plane rolls to the left. When I go left rudder, plane goes to the right. This value is way too high, so we would want to reduce this by a lot. Let's say 3%, for example. So now this is doing the right thing with just a very little amount of movement. This would work pretty well for most people. One way to do this a bit better is setting up different amounts for left rudder and right rudder. The same plane will need a bit more or less amount of aileron to compensate when you're using the rudder based off if you're using left rudder or right rudder. To do this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring this to 100% weight in both of them. And this one I'm going to keep also as, we can keep it as 100%. Actually, I'm going to keep it negative, and I'll show you why. So right now, obviously this is way too much, but we have the right directions. So what I'm going to do is set up a new curve. So I'm going to do this rad to ail. I'm going to make it custom. I'm going to make it 3 points. And the reason why I was setting this to 100 before is because I want to just be able to see in a single place what value am I applying to the mix. If I had like 20% weight and 3% in my curve, I have to run some calculations to understand how much mix I'm actually applying. In this case, I can just say, okay, I want to apply 6% when I'm using left rudder. Actually, in this case, I would want this to be negative, because I want left rudder to give me a right roll. And then on right rudder, let's say we want 3%. So now we have the ability of having only a 3% mix applied for right rudder, while we have a 6% applied for left rudder. That takes care of for rudder-to-aileron. The next step would be the rudder-to-elevator. So same idea, we're gonna create a new mix. We can use the predefined rudder-to-elevator. Last position. And let's see what we get by default. So if I move the rudder to the left, it's giving us up elevator, which could be a good first step. We were mentioning before how often when you are in knife edge, apply, in this case, right rudder, the plane will try to pitch down a little bit. We want to compensate with our mix pitching up. However, what happens now, we go on the opposite rudder. So if we go left rudder, it pitches up. If we go right rudder, it pitches down. So this mix definitely doesn't work for us. We are gonna have to set up also a custom curve here. So I'm gonna go to curve. I'm gonna create a new curve. I call this rud to elevator. Okay. And same as before, custom curve, 3 points. And now we can set that V-shape curve. So if I go to the left, I want this to pitch up. So one thing that, this is the reason why before I set the weight to 100 in the other mix. Right now I'm applying a lot of mix, but very little is happening here. That's because this almost 40% is being reduced with the weight of the mix. So I'm gonna bring this all the way up to 100%. And now the actual value we're applying is all in this page. So I'm gonna put this to, let's say 5%, 5% up. And now for my right rudder, is doing the right thing. If I go this way. So now we are applying 5% one way, 5% the other way. Both are bringing the elevator up. This is also a very good setup so that if I need to apply more elevator when we're using rudder one way versus the other one, it's as simple as modifying the value of one of the 2 points. So let's say that for right rudder, I need much more elevator. This is way too much. This is just so that it shows up well in video. But that's we need 15% for right rudder and only 5% for left rudder. This lets us do that very easily. The other thing we could do here for both rudder-aileron and rudder-elevator mixes is set up a way to let us tune these values in flight. The problem right now is that in order to tune these mixes, we'll have to go up in the air, we'll have to do a couple of passes and knife edge, see hands off when we're just applying rudder to keep the plane level, what happens with the plane. If the plane needs more mix for rudder-to-aileron or for rudder-to-elevator, we will have to land the plane and increase or decrease the value as needed. One thing we could do is set up, for example, these momentary switches to let us tune those values in flight. I would personally just set up maybe this top and bottom to tune the left rudder points and maybe these 2 buttons to tune the right rudder points for one of the mixes. So let's say on this flight you focused on rudder-to-aileron mix, and in the second flight you focused on rudder-to-elevator mix. I'll show you an example with one of those, but the same thing would apply for either mix. So let's look at the rudder-to-elevator, for example. So to do this, I'm gonna do a couple of things. First, I'm going to set up these buttons so that they are usable as momentary switches. So I'm gonna go to Edit Model and make sure that when it says function switches, they are set to momentary. Otherwise, this will not work. Now I'm going to go to vars, and I'm gonna create a new var. I'm gonna call this left. We know that these mixes are gonna be somewhere probably below 10%, so I'm gonna set my max value to 10%. I don't want to worry about having some crazy, ridiculous mix, so this will give me a limit. And for the minimum, I'm also gonna set this to 0. That way, I'm not having to worry about having the wrong direction. This is assuming that you, at this point, you know that the plane always pitches down and rolls the opposite direction or the same direction as the rudder. If you have no idea where that goes, you could always set this to minus 10% and 10% and find out in the air. But yeah, in my case, I'm gonna set this to 0 to 10. And then what I'm gonna do here is add a new action. So I'm gonna be using this FS1 momentary button to go up. I want it to go up by 0.0%. And I'm gonna add a new action, FS3. I'm gonna set this to subtract, also 0.5. So now that you look at here at the value, you can see that when I go up, every time I click, it's bringing the value up by 0.5%. When I go down, it brings the value down by 0.5%. And the limits are 0 to 10%. So I'm going to now clone this. And I'm gonna edit the new one. I'm gonna call this right. Oh. Oh. Same range. The only thing I'm going to change here is the buttons. So to go up, I'm going to click this one, FS4. To go down, I'm going to click this one, FS6. So now I have my two separate values. I'm going to use this one for left rudder, this one for right rudder. And don't worry about this one. This one is something I was setting up for a different tutorial. But now we go back to mixes, and let's say that in this flight I want to tune rudder-to-elevator mix. I can go to my rudder-to-elevator. I'm going to go to Edit Curve. And now, instead of using these fixed values, what I'm going to do is hold, click Use as Source, click again, and I'm gonna look at vars. And for left point, I'm going to click left. On the right point, I'm going to hold, use as source, click again, vars, right. So now our right point is driven by these two momentary switches, or left point is driven by two momentary switches. One thing I'm going to make sure, I'm going to bring this way up, both of them, and I'm going to make sure that the direction is correct. In this case, it's different from what I want. I want both to be pitching up. So I could change their design here, or I could change the sign here. So I'm going to bring this to -100. Doesn't really matter where you change it. So now, if I go right rudder, I'm going up. If I go left rudder, I'm going up. If I see that the left rudder mix is too much, I can bring it down. If I see that the right rudder needs to be more, I can bring it up to that 10%. And the idea here is that you can use that same var for the other mix once you're done with this one. So let's say you do 1 or 2 flights, you have tuned things the way you like them. Now you can go and look at what values the vars you ended up with are. So say 3.5%, 10%. Now you could go to your mix and modify the values on your curve to be just those values but fixed. That way you don't have to worry about these buttons anymore. And you could reuse those vars to tune the other mix. So you could go to Rudder-to-Aileron and reuse those vars and those buttons to tune that. Once you're done, again, switch them to fixed values and you're done. Again, this is totally optional. It's a bit more time on setup, but it will make your mix tuning process so much faster and much more precise. If you're not familiar with vars, they basically hold a value, and you can, as you saw, you can use different methods to kind of change the value of that var. And that var will be persistent. So if you have the right bar set to 3%, and you power off the radio, and tomorrow you come back and turn it on again, that bar will still have that 3% value. So it's a very handy feature, not just for these mixes, but for many other things. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Until the next video, happy flying!